Bonfire Rendezvous is a great event, and being here, you can see pretty clearly that there's something about fire that draws people in. It creates an atmosphere that brings people together and becomes the centerpiece for some of the best conversations. And maybe part of the reason that fire still has that effect on us is because for most of human history, it was essential. It meant heat, cooking, light that extended the working hours, protection from predators, and a way to boil water and make it safer to use. So, I thought this would be a fitting opportunity to lean into the more traditional side of fire by building one with minimal tools and then putting it to work. All right, so we're not rubbing sticks together out here. The goal is to use simple tools and practical methods. So, what we're going to do is just talk about some tools. You're going to need a saw, preferably. This is obviously for sawing sections of wood into smaller sections, processing that down. It is also good that it is a high carbon steel that is not coated with a square edge on it. I'll talk about that in just a second. Next thing is a knife. Lots of knives out there. Use one that's good and sturdy. It can be folding. A fixed bladed knife honestly works better. This will be used for processing the smaller pieces of wood down into little tiny chunks for tinder that we can light easily with sparks. So make those sparks with a ferro rod. Now, that's how it works. They usually come with these little strikers on them. A wise man once told me that all ferro rods are not made equal. So get a decent quality one. There's a few out there. Just do your reviews and see what's good. With the ferro rod, that's why we wanted the square spine. You can make pretty good sparks with that. Obviously, I'm not trying to throw sparks all over right now, but this is going to make things a lot easier. It's a lot better to grip than this little tiny striker that it comes with. If we have a hard time making a fire or getting it to start with this, it's wet outside, whatever, I'm no stranger to using some of these oil-based artificial tinders. So these are just little petroleum-based infused little wax pieces, and what they do is they make it a lot easier to catch that spark and to get that starting. You can usually tear these into little pieces to get the fire going, but if you want to use a whole swab, totally fine. Mind you, we're not trying to win any bushcraft awards out here, just trying to do this the old-fashioned way a little bit. So last thing, a lighter. Now this isn't a little bitty Bic lighter, but honestly, those work great. So we can start a little fire with this, and it's in a lot easier way than this. And honestly, a lighter is a lot more practical to have and keep around. Bic lighters work great. They'll always work. Worst case scenario, you have to dry it out, and then it'll work. So, you know, a little Bic lighter or just a lighter like this for safety, totally good. So remember, we're not trying to use super primitive methods. We're just trying to use practical tools to make a fire that actually can do some work. All right, once we have our tools sorted out, one of the first things we're going to want to do is gather some fuel. So that's going to be wood. So when you're looking for wood, you want something that breaks pretty cleanly. It's dry. You can see that it's dry. There's no wetness in there. It's not got any green to it. And it's pretty well some dry wood. It breaks off pretty easily for the most part. Some of these twigs break off pretty easily and no issues there. So what we're going to want to do is get some little teeny tiny pieces like this. That's going to be kindling. Okay, it's going to be kindling, borderline tinder somewhat, but little small stuff. Moving up from the tinder pieces and the small little kindling pieces, we're going to want larger pieces. So you can see behind me, this tree has been cut off, and where it's cut is also very dry, which is a good indicator that the wood that came off of it is also going to be dry by now. Now, there's a part down here below that is laying on the ground. That is more likely to be wet because it's touching the ground, and if it's rained, it's going to wick up into that wood. But there's sections here of this dead tree that's been cut that up here are completely off the ground, and those are the pieces we're going to want to use. Now, when we're processing that, we're going to want to be careful that it doesn't fall on us or hurt anybody or anything. That's, you know, safety is a thing, so make sure that you're being aware of that. But we'll just break some pieces off of this. You want to get more than you need. So it goes tinder, it's little bitty pieces. Then we're going to go kindling, that's a little bit larger pieces. And then the last thing in the progression is our full-on firewood that we're going to use when we're actually getting this fire to be a workable system. So let's get this stuff gathered up and we'll go from there. Now that we've gathered some firewood, got our kindling, our tinder, all of that stuff, the stuff we're going to use for that, we need to process it down into usable, workable pieces. So we're going to start from largest to smallest in processing. So we're going to break down some of these larger pieces. This is like your proper firewood fuel. This is your workable, like actual working fuel that we're going to use at the end of this process. And that needs to be a little bit large. Now I'm using this fire pit, so this is nowhere near as large as you could use, but you want to break it down into chunks. I usually say around the length from your wrist to your elbow is a good size, and it just so happens that that length is about perfect for this little fire pit we're going to be using today. So what we want to do is saw that down. That's what our saw is also going to be used for. I'm going to get some of this saw down, and then we'll talk about our next section, which is going to be our kindling. All right, now we pretty much got our working wood sorted out. We're gonna move on to some of the kindling. So kindling is gonna be stuff that is usually about as big around as your finger or smaller to a point. So that's about the size. It's not as big as your arm, but like around, more like the size of a finger, a digit. So that's what we're going to do now. So this is going to be what we use to fuel the fire up to the point where it's large enough to take on the larger wood. So we just process this stuff down. Now, we don't have to use a saw for that. We can just break this stuff usually. If it's good, if it's going to be a good wood to use, oh, that's some stiff stuff, but if it's a good wood to use, usually it will just break just like that. All right, so our next step is going to be tinder. Tinder is the real small stuff. This is where it starts. This is where the whole thing begins. The reason why we're doing this the way we're doing it is because you want wood in a spectrum of sizes that you can start small with the fire and work it up. Whenever you were born, you weren't immediately able to spring up and do a bunch of work. We want this fire to be able to do some work, so we've got to raise it up. Got little bitty stuff we got to take care of it, raise it up, and then it can take on some bigger stuff, and then we'll move on and it'll grow up even more, and it can take on this real stuff, and it can get to work for us because we've taken care of it. So if you take care of your fire, it will take care of you. Now, for the tinder, we're gonna want little itty bitty small stuff. Little bitty small stuff. This is little twigs that came off of that branch. And that's part of why I just dragged a few decent limbs and just ran off with them for the most part. So we want little stuff like that. Other stuff that can work is if you find some brush that is, you know, dead, standing stuff, then sometimes you'll get little things like this that got little husks on them. And that is fibrous, and that will take a spark or flame really well as well. If you don't have any of that stuff, you can use your larger stuff to process down using your knife. So using your knife, what you can do is pretty much just take these pieces, find a little bit better one, and you can shave little flecks off of it. And that's going to give you little fine wood shavings. And so what you can do is just prop your knife like that, and just very carefully do that. And I'll gather some up here and show them to you. And what you end up with is little teeny tiny little wood chips that look like that. And that'll take a spark really well. And that will work just fine for you. Remember, we're not trying to do this the hard way, like at all costs. So if for some reason you can't get that to light, it could be wet, really dry today, so I've got a little bit easy. I'm no stranger to using some artificial tinder. So feel free to use that. There's no problem with that at all. But once we get all this stuff processed down and everything ready to go, we'll be on to the next stage. What we're going to want to do is arrange the wood in a way that it can build naturally. So we're going to start off with a little bit of kindling and tinder mixed together. Real small kindling and tinder. You want the tinder on top and permeated through. And the reason why I do that is because the small itty bitty kindling, like borderline tinder stuff, gives a little bit of gap and spacing whenever we are lighting this fire to give it some air. Fire needs air, otherwise it will literally suffocate. So we're going to do that, keeping a little bit larger stuff nearby so that we can easily put that on the fire as it starts to grow. So before we throw that first spark into that tinder to get this fire going, we're going to want to make sure we're using the ferro rod right, if that's what you're going to use. So the thing is that just because you're throwing sparks doesn't mean that you're doing it necessarily the best way that's going to work out for you. So you can use the little strikers that come with them. Some of them are junk, some of them are really good. This one happens to be pretty darn good. But something that I like to do is to use this saw. It gives you a good hand grip. You can get a good purchase on it, and you can get a firm scrape on that ferro rod. So that's another thing to use. You can also use the backside of a knife. If it is not coated, it has a square spine, and it's similarly good high quality steel. So that's some things to keep in mind. Now, whenever you're throwing them sparks, you don't want to just throw sparks. You're not lighting a fire with that. You're not lighting a fire with that. You're just throwing little sparks. What you need is pressure, not speed. So what we're going to want to do, in short, is get a firm grip on the ferro rod and on the striking element or tool you're going to use while standing. Get about waist high where it's nice and comfortable, close to your body, and put them together. And without making a spark, I want you to scrape along that ferro rod, and you should see little flakes, looks kind of like pepper, coming off of it. If you have a brand new ferro rod, it'll take a little bit of time for it to get worn a little bit more flat where that'll work for you. I did that there. We had a bunch coming off, and a lot of pressure, but really slow. And then the next thing you're going to want to do is do that same thing and speed it up. Speed it up. And then you're going to get more and more and more. And now this is a pretty new ferro rod, so it just so happens that because it's a high quality one, this thing works really good. And so, but because it's new, it's not very flat. This works really good, so I'll show you where the spark should be going properly. Almost caught my pants on fire. The spark should go hit the ground from your waist, and they should continue to sizzle after hitting the ground. They're not going to sizzle for very long after hitting the ground, but there's going to be some sizzle even after they hit the ground. So this thing works really good for this one. And you'll see those are really working really well with this one. Honestly, I've had a few ferro rods with the striker, and I've never used a striker. This one works really good. Once we start this fire, things are just going to start moving a whole lot faster. So make sure that you've taken the time to prep everything you need, a little bit more than you need, to make sure that you're not running around like a chicken with their head cut off, trying to get this thing to stay going once it's lit. Once it's lit, it's pretty much go time. So make sure all that stuff's close by. Like I said, it's right within arm's reach. Easy peasy. Let's light this puppy. Now, you're not going to get it the first time necessarily, but once it gets going, you got to just baby that fire. Just baby it. Look at that. Starting to go. Just keep feeding that fire. Don't be discouraged if you have to do it again. Happens to everybody. Look at that. Ooh, the wind is helping us out. All right, start layering it. Start layering it, let it grow naturally. Make sure you don't smother it out, and just feed it a little bit at a time. And never get too ahead of yourself. I should mention, we're not in a fire ban, but we're close. So we're getting into a little bit of the larger kindling now. Man, that's taking really good. I got a lot of tinder in there, a lot of those shavings in there, and that's why you get a big fire like that. Right off the rip, you got a lot of it. It gives you some time to work. The more material you can come up with, especially the small stuff, is going to give you the most time to work. All right, we're getting a little extra on that, so I'm going to let it breathe for a minute, let it build up, let it do its thing. All right, now we got that fire going. We put some of the larger stuff on it. We've built it up slowly. Remember to let the fire earn the next pieces of fuel. The goal here is to build a usable fire. So fire is for looks, but coals are what does the work. So we're getting that bed of coals down and under there. And you might be able to see that on camera, I'm not sure, but we got a good set of coals starting to go down up under there. So once we get that going good and we're really happy with it, we're going to move on to putting this thing to work. Got some potatoes, got some butter in there. I'm gonna fry up a little bit of a more traditional meal with a little bit less traditional flair, which is some hot dogs I'm gonna throw in there once this butter and everything gets melted down. That already sounds good. Now remember, the coals are what's doing the work here. We don't have hardly a flame at all, but those coals down there are still hot and they're still putting heat into this food. So we can just keep stirring this until it's done. It's no hamburger helper, but it'll do. This is the practical side of fire. It's what drew people in historically. But fire still draws people in, and events like this make it easy to see why. It creates atmosphere, it brings people together, and it turns into the center of camp almost without even trying. But spending some time building one from the ground up is a good reminder that fire has always been more than that. It's been a tool, one that gave people heat, a way to cook food, boil water, and light up the darkness. So even now, in a world full of convenience, it's still worth knowing how to build a fire with a few simple tools and make it do useful work. Field work.